Because in the debate between people who have a religious outlook and those who don't, the question most often asked by people who are religious is, well, what are you going to put in its place? What is going to be the foundation of our morality? How are people going to deal with the difficulties and tragedies of life? As if religion was the only resource for answers. And indeed, the assumption is sometimes made that it's the best resource for answers. But the fact is, of course, that there is a much richer, much deeper, indeed even more ancient than certainly the young religions of the world, like Christianity and Islam, a much more long-standing way of thinking about these things, which is vastly more encouraging, vastly more of a support to anybody who will accept the invitation to think along humanist lines.
You got to thank the Lord, right?
I'm actually an atheist.
There is absolutely no doubt that atheism will win hands down.
If I were in a situation where I could stop a child rapist, I would. And that's the difference between me and your God.
Welcome to Atheist Avengers Radio with your hosts, Agent Wyatt Mathers and Major MacGuffin. Our continuing mission is to explore our world, to seek out injustices and oppressive ideologies, to leave science and reason in our wake, fighting for justice, truth, and equality for all. We are here to inspire the next generation of godless heroes, avenge the harms of religion, educate the uninformed, and ensure the well-being of all individuals by defending the separation between church and state. The Atheist Avengers. Because together, we can change the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Atheist Avengers. A long time ago, I had a decision to make. I had to decide which secular group I wanted to align myself with. I looked into the American Atheists, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Recovering from Religion. There's all kinds of different secular groups out there, but the one I'm most identified with or felt like aligned with my journey was the American Humanist Association. So that brings me to ask the question all the time, exactly what is a humanist? How do I define myself? I continually evolve that definition. But there's many people out there that is teaching us every day what humanism is. And we've invited one particular humanist into our studio to talk with us about what humanism is. Major Mac, would you like to tell us who we've got in the studio?
I sure will. Fred Edwards has a long history in organized humanism. For 15 years, he was executive director of the American Humanist Association, for 12 years, editor of the Humanist magazine, and for 6 years, national director of the United Coalition of Reason. He is past president of Camp Quest, a summer camp for free-thinking children, and has served on the board of the International Humanist and Ethical Union and the founding board of the National Center for Science Education. Through the 1980s, he was the founder and editor of the Creation Evolution Journal, the only publication specializing in answering creationist arguments, and debated all the nation's leading creationists. As a continuing voice for humanist ideas, he has, over the past 40 years, appeared on national and local radio and television in the United States and Canada, been interviewed on radio and for newspapers around the world, and has lectured in North America, Europe, and India. Today, he is Director of Planned Giving for the Humanist Foundation of the American Humanist Association and would be pleased to help you provide a future for your humanist values in your will or other estate plan. He also serves on the adjunct faculty of the Humanist Institute, is the American Humanist Association's historian, and sits on the broader Social Impacts Committee of the Hall of Human Origins at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. Please welcome to the show and live in the studio tonight, Mr. Fred Edwards.
Well.
Hello, Mr. Edwards. How are you?
Oh, well, I'm just fine. I was listening to that introduction and a lot of things that I've done, but I thought the biggest two were that I was executive director of the American Humanist Association for 15 years, and I was editor of its national publication, the Humanist magazine, for 12. So I consider those. And I founded a journal called Creation Evolution, which specialized in answering all of the arguments against creationists. And I used to debate. Well, I debated all of the greatest creationists in all creation throughout the 1980s.
Wow. I heard Sarah Palin is getting ready to talk with Bill Nye the Science Guy about evolution and about climate change.
Climate change.
Yeah, so maybe you can get in on that. That would be an easy debate.
Well, yeah, but I don't need to get in on it. I mean, Bill Nye.
He's got it.
I mean, after all, we know that Sarah Palin reads all the newspapers. And so
she just listens to Fox News.
She can read the Russian newspaper from her front porch.
Yes. So this won't be difficult.
Well, there's no doubt that it would have probably been easier to name things that you haven't been involved with than everything that you have. But you've done a lot in the community. I've known you for quite a while. We had when I first started the Hickory Humanist here, you actually I got involved with a seminar that you did about marketing your group.
Yeah.
And that was very informative and kind of gave me a kickstart. So, first of all, just thank you for everything you do, because we need the support from people like you that aren't afraid to stand up and get out there and help these groups get started. So thanks for everything.
I'm happy to do it. And it's nice being a career humanist, because you don't have to worry that anyone's going to fire you for being a humanist.
Right.
So I can speak freely.
Oh, that is great.
Well, that is one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because we know in our area, we tend to deal with a lot of discrimination. I've talked about it on the show before. Just as a group, we've been discriminated against as far as there was places that we were going to meet that wouldn't allow us to meet there. We've had T-shirt companies that have refused to make our T-shirts all because they say good without a God. Mm-hmm. Through your career, what kind of discriminations have you seen that you thought is worthy noting? And the main reason I bring these things up is because people are going through this. Yeah. So it's nice to hear the kind of things that maybe you've been through and how you overcome those things.
Yeah, well, you're not alone. There's a lot of that kind of, I'd say, low-level discrimination. It's not the kind of thing that results so much in major legal violations. It isn't so much the kind of thing that results in, say, violence against people, as we see with certain other groups. Many people have had to suffer significant violence and public prejudice against them in their neighborhoods and things like that.
Right.
And we tend not to get so much of that in this country. Now, if you're in Bangladesh, it's another story. They come out with the machetes and they cut you up. So if you try to do this podcast in Bangladesh, well, you wouldn't be around too long. I don't even know why they do it, because it is so dangerous to do. For me, it has not been dangerous to do this. It's been occasionally uncomfortable, but it's not been dangerous. But we do experience the kind of discrimination you're talking about. For example, you try to put up a billboard, and some billboard companies will say, well, no, we don't want to do that. And they have the legal right to discriminate because they're a publisher and they don't have to publish everything that comes along the way. But then you just turn to their competitor. And sometimes a small town competitor, a billboard company that's just hungry for business, they're glad to have the business.
Right.
So it's not that big of a problem usually. And in one situation in West Virginia, we were publicizing a billboard campaign, and the newspaper in Morgantown, West Virginia, just decided not to cover us. And we thought, well, the whole aim of having this billboard is to get media attention, and the major and only newspaper in town suddenly decides to have a media blackout on it. But they made one mistake, and that is they published a letter to the editor criticizing our billboard. Well, that gave us the in, so I immediately told the organizers of the effort with the billboard, I said, all right, now you just immediately write a letter to the editor that counters that letter to the editor, because this letter to the editor said that the humanists and atheists should repent for their billboard. And so you title your letter to the editor, Why We Won't Repent for Our Godless Billboard. Well, they published that as the top letter to the editor in the next day's paper. And people read the letters to the editor oftentimes more than they read the news stories. And here we got to present our viewpoint on the whole thing and get it prominent and front and center. And it would turn out to be better publicity because we got that resistance. It didn't have to run through the filter of some reporter. We got to say it our own way. So oftentimes you can turn these lemons into a lemonade. You can just turn that around on you. And when you get a lot of resistance for something you do, you put on a program and then people attack and criticize you. Well, that leads then to more news coverage of your original story. And so you kind of want a little of that backlash because it keeps the story alive. You don't just die because people forgot all about you or didn't notice. You know, you get lots of notice. And yeah, there's people who don't like you, but think of all of the people who do like you, who you now reach because you did something controversial and got a few people riled up, who then shot themselves in the foot, falling all over themselves to attack you and therefore making you more famous with your audience. So so whenever you can do those kinds of things, not deliberately to tick other people off, but things that you know probably will and yet are not offensive in and of themselves. Like our billboard said, don't believe in God, you are not alone. Well, that doesn't tell people not to believe in God, but a lot of the evangelicals read it that way and they got all offended by it. When in fact, we were just asking an innocuous question. Are you one of those folks like us who doesn't believe in God? Well, if so, we're over here. How benign is that? It just says we have a right to exist and let people know we're here. So, yeah, you can usually turn these things to your purposes. It's not a dangerous thing. It's not a bad thing to do. And the discrimination can therefore be worked in our favor. It's not a discrimination you need to fret too much about, but it's out there. But then once you've done that, then people sort of realize the sky hasn't fallen just because you're there. And then they start getting used to you and maybe even like you, and then the discrimination goes away. So in the long run, we win.
Yeah, I saw the video of you on Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Talking about for goodness sake on the side of buses.
Yeah, that was in Washington, D.C. We said, well, I believe in a God, just be good for goodness sake. And so, yeah, that got me on Bill O'Reilly, and that got me the opportunity to present the ideas of the American Humanist Association and say to people, hey, if you're looking for a group, if you're out there and you don't know that there are others like you out there, well, here we are. And that was the aim. And yeah, I wasn't going to convince most of Bill O'Reilly's audience, but I don't care about them anyway. I wrote them off before I went on the show. But we talked to our own audience because there's sort of a fad among some atheists. They like to listen to conservative talk radio just to kind of monitor it and keep track of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know how they stand it, but it's their hobby and they're out there and we can reach them.
So I understand what you're saying because we do ReasonCon here in Hickory, and I was really hoping to have the protesters and the public outcry against it. Mm-hmm. And the main reason I wanted that was not for just the conflict of it, but it was because it's publicity.
Right.
They don't realize that they're actually doing us a favor.
Sure.
When they complain about us.
Right.
Because there's people out there. I often talk about the water cooler promotion.
Yeah.
And what that is somebody gets pissed off because they find out that there's a humanist group or an atheist group in their town, and they go to work and they talk about it, and they don't realize that the person they're talking about it to is interested because they want to go get involved in it now.
Right.
So they end up promoting it for us.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, no, it is important that they spell your name right. And it is important
Exactly.
that you have an easy to remember name and that a Googleable name, one that people, when they hear it, can spell it right and Google it and look it up because the internet has leveled the playing field for our movement. Back in the day, if you wanted to enjoy the full benefits of freedom of the press, you had to own one. Today, the internet makes it possible for everybody to have a voice.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
that, so the big churches, they can have all their stuff, but then we can link to them. They can link to us. The conversation goes back and forth. Dialogue occurs. The barriers are broken. The hermetically sealed compartments are broken into, and ideas flow all across the internet.
Yeah.
Because of those connections. And then you can go on Wikipedia, and in various religious listings, you can put links to humanist ones, and you can do all sorts of things and tie it all together. And people who get curious can find out. Like, we ran an advertisement on satellite radio, letting people know about the secular directory. The secular directory is a listing of all of the secular groups all over the United States and Canada, with some in foreign countries listed. And so we made the ad to where it would really get noticed by atheists. We said, we'd like to tell atheists where to go. And one guy told me when he heard those words on the ad, he almost drove off the road. He was an atheist. He says, we'd like to tell atheists where to go. You go right to the secular directory to find a group near you if you're looking for other atheists. So, you gotta catch people's attention. But the secular directory is a great resource to just find any group near you in any part of this state or any other.
Right. You actually helped, way back when we did that seminar, you helped me prepare our, press release.
Yes.
When we created this group. And one of the things that kind of took me aback, because when I was writing the press release, I was trying to soften everything, don't use the word atheist, and you were just kind of like, no, that's not what you want to do. Put the godless on there. Make sure that it gets the attention. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense, because how else do we find those people? If we soften it, or we change really what we're doing or what the meaning is, then how do people know that they want to be involved?
Well, that's part of it. And the other part of it is how does the news media even know they care about this? They're going to say, where's the story here?
Right.
And you have to reach them.
Yeah.
So you have to pop that balloon in a crowded room and make everybody turn and look. So, yeah. So I said, use the word godless in your headline, and because godless is golden, godless group, forming, godless billboard up on this highway. I even had a situation where there was a local picnic being held, and they wanted me to publicize their picnic and get some reporters out. Now, I didn't really see a story there, but I did it for them anyway, and I wrote a press release that said, ungodly leaders to gather at picnic. And I got 2 reporters out. So, yeah, you have to get the attention. Now, once you've got the attention, then you can give your intellectually sound message, and your more modest message. Right. But you first have to get their attention. And sometimes that means doing goofy things. These debaptisms, where you use a hairdryer. Of course it's ridiculous, and it's just fun, and there's nothing of any intellectual interest in that at all. But if it lets people know, 1, that you have a sense of humor, and 2, that you exist, well, then that does the job. And then they go to your website, and if you have all sorts of serious, intelligent things on your website, and people can dig deep and read articles about all the things you care about and are involved in, well, then you will attract people. But you first have to get their attention.
Absolutely. Well, they have to know you're there.
Exactly.
And today, with all the information that's out there, it's hard. You can get lost in the amount of information. So, the social media helps, but it hurts all at the same time, because it gets your information out there easily and free, but yet there's so much more information getting out. It's just sometimes you get lost.
It's so ephemeral on social media. It comes and it goes. So if you don't happen to catch it that day, how many people scroll down on Facebook to go back to 2 days worth of posts to find? Right. I mean, I've had some things sweep by me on Facebook, and I go, oh gosh, I need to find that. I need to find where that was, and I'm going back, and I'm not finding it because there's just so much junk.
Exactly. It's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was wanting to ask you, since we do have a professor in the room, we're going to go to something that has a little education. With your over 40 years of experience in teaching other people about humanism, what do you find is the easiest way to teach about humanism to people like me?
Well, see, right there, the last part of the question is the important part. You say to people like you, because it depends on who you're talking to, how they came to their current ideas, what issues are they are dealing with. In other words, there isn't a magic bullet that you can just, you just say this or you tell them that fact and they'll go, oh, I see. And then all of a sudden the whole world flocks to your door. It doesn't work that way because different people are concerned about different things. So for some people, if they're leaving traditional religion right now and they're dealing with some of the stress issues associated with that, well, they'd like a little help with that. On the other hand, if a young couple are getting married and they realize that they don't believe any of the religious stuff and they would just like something that doesn't have a religious minister, but they don't know where to turn. If you can offer them those kinds of celebrant services or a memorial service or a funeral for somebody who was a non-believer or the family members are or both, we have people trained who can do these things. And so you catch people at that moment of need and you deliver the service that they're looking for, then you can reach people far more effectively. And so if someone is a more intellectual type and left-brained and they say, well, prove it to me, well, then, we can show what our position is and we can get all technical and philosophical and go on that. If other people they just want to socialize, this whole thing like drinking skeptically, which is some of these groups form and many of the meetup groups. It's just godless drinking buddies, and that's all they want. They don't want to lecture. They don't want to go to school. They don't want all of this stuff that like some of the other groups do. So they just want to hang out and have new friends who are of like mind. So that's the kind of thing that does it for them. And then there's this Sunday assembly thing, which is kind of like all the fun at church with none of the doctrine. They get to come and sing songs and be happy with people and listen to a homily that's very secular oriented and humanistic. And that pleases them for their Sunday morning entertainment, and they're off to enjoy their week. So how you approach it depends on what people's needs are. It's often been said that you can't intellectually talk somebody out of their religious views if they didn't arrive at them intellectually in the first place. If they arrived at them emotionally, they were down and out, they were suffering, this met some kind of need or what have you. And then if you can address that need in a secular way, then that's your entree into that person.
Well, that is good. Yeah, like I said, I haven't come from a Christian background or anything, and so I am like a complete sponge when it comes to learning about this kind of thing. So I've been trying to implement humanism into my life every day. So I know humanism is supposed to be like an ethical philosophy that we strive to use in everyday life, and so how do you, after most of your life you've been in the humanism, how do you implement it each day in your life?
Well, you can implement it in little ways and big ways. The little ways are the day-to-day ethical decisions that you have to make. And we, as humanists, accept the idea that moral dilemmas exist, that there can be a conflict between two goods, or you might have to look for the lesser of two evils, and that all the answers are not easy to find, and that moral living in a complex society is difficult. So you need to acknowledge the difficulty of it and not be afraid of that situation and be bold. But we have many of the same ethical values that more conventional and traditional religious people have. You might call them the common decencies, that we share the common decencies. We don't believe in stealing and killing people and all sorts of other things, and that we care about empathy and we're concerned. But I add that the common decencies aren't enough, that you need the uncommon decencies. And this is where we are willing to step outside the status quo, think outside the box and say, well, wait a minute. What people among the have-nots are we ignoring? Who among the disenfranchised can we enfranchise? Can we comfort the uncomfortable, and can we make uncomfortable the too comfortable, and therefore upset the status quo a little bit to get some social change going that needs to happen, because there are many issues that we confront in our society, and it isn't enough just to be civil or polite or decent or anything like that, because when things are wrong, when you have, for example, the prison industrial complex, which is really a big thing. Not only the privatization of prisons, but all of those businesses that supply prisons with bars of soap and uniforms and security equipment and all that. They have a vested interest in having lots and lots of things made crimes so they can have lots and lots of prisoners so that they can build more and more facilities and they can serve them. They're in business to make money and they know which side the bread's buttered on. Well, that doesn't help society. And so we have, so many people incarcerated in this country compared to all of the other countries in the world. And why is that? It's because prison, like religion, is big business. And that's why we have so much of both. And we need to take a fresh look at that and say, are there crimes against property that don't need to be as harshly punished as crimes against persons? Are there things that shouldn't be made crimes? Are there certain things that are more a medical issue than they are a criminal issue? Are we criminalizing medical issues? What are we doing? And what are we doing to ourselves? And what are we doing to perfectly decent people? Now, one of the things that the American Humanist Association has been working on lately is its Appignani Humanist Legal Center just dealt with the Federal Bureau of Prisons to get it established that humanism is a legitimate position that people can take within prison. They can form prison clubs just like they can form Christian clubs and Jewish clubs and Muslim clubs and so on, and that they can celebrate Darwin Day. We established it that now prisons have to recognize Darwin Day as a legitimate observance that prisoners are entitled to opt into. So that helps with the identity of those who, because they find themselves in this system, they still have needs that need to be met. Now, we don't always know what their special crime is and what we think of that. But the fact is that, you hear all this stuff about Christian prison ministries, and it's just so hard due to discrimination, as you were mentioning earlier, to even get a toehold. And then, furthermore, there are prison programs that are actually effective. Now, the Christian prison programs, one of the problems with those is their data are cooked. They have all of this data that supports, they have this, these people improve and so on. Well, that's just because if you don't improve, they kick you out of the program. Right, so, that's true. Whereas what humanists and others do is they have classes where they teach philosophy, Socratic cross-examination, or they teach literature. And a lot of people who are in prison, it isn't that they need to be rehabilitated. It's they were never habilitated in the first place. They grew up in a criminal neighborhood. They really don't know how to think about ethical questions. And philosophy and literature helps get people thinking about questions they never thought about before and dealing with moral issues. And if they are not sociopathic, they are capable of finding the empathy within them and looking at themselves in a way that can lead to self-improvement and giving up a life of crime. And since most people in prison are eventually getting out, that's what we should be focused on. We keep focusing on, we'll get them into prison because they did bad things. And I agree that you oftentimes have to remove such people from the mainstream of society where they will do no harm, but they're not usually going to be there forever. And so what's the plan? What's the follow-up plan when they get out? What are you doing to make sure that when they get out, they don't offend again and someone else is a victim and then they're back in? It isn't just that they go back in. It's that somebody else had to get hurt before they go back in. Right. And social consciousness requires that we be concerned about future victims of those who we will necessarily have to release from prison. So we're just not a responsible society if we are not reducing recidivism.
It's all about the money.
Yeah. And locally, to try to help with that type of work. The problem that we've got most prevalent in our prisons around here is the lack of a support structure for addicts.
Yeah.
That is not religious based.
Right. And that was a big issue. When I was editor of the Humanist magazine, we would publish articles about all of the alternatives to Alcoholics Anonymous, because Alcoholics Anonymous requires that you turn to a higher power. And it assumes that alcoholism and other drug abuse is an incurable disease, and you just learn to be at peace with it and live with it, and you're constantly struggling and fighting, and it's kind of promotes an idea of futility, and that you can never get well. And it's also this idea that the only solution to addiction is to become addicted to your recovery group.
Right.
So we began promoting a thing called Smart Recovery, and a lot of humanist local groups all over the country have Smart Recovery meetings, and people come and they talk about their drug addiction or their alcohol addiction or whatever else it may be. And they deal with these things because these programs address the whole person. They're not just talking about the addiction like as though it were something in isolation. It's part of the whole person. And what is it about your personality? What is it about your life? What is it about the way you think that is leading you to have these behaviors? And it's based largely on the rational emotive behavior therapy of Albert Ellis, who was a Humanist of the Year of the American Humanist Association back in the 1970s. Albert Ellis was an atheist, identified as a humanist very strongly, and his rational emotive behavior therapy is really, I think, the approach of choice for people who are humanistically and atheistically inclined.
Yeah. Yeah, we call ours reasonable recovery.
Okay, that's fine.
We have our reasonable recovery. And one of the things that we've been working on lately is actually trying to get some support into the prisons for people. The prisons around here literally think that AA is the only option.
Yeah, and the courts have quite often done that, and it takes a little educating the courts. And Smart Recovery is a well-organized national organization, in fact, international organization now, and it will help you if you connect with them. It will help you get that recognition to where judges actually sentence people to attend Smart Recovery meetings.
That's what we need. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so if the judges send you there, then that's it. But part of the problem is that if one of our non-theistic types goes to an AA meeting, now you can decide that something else is your higher power besides God, like the group or something like that. But some of the people who run AA meetings, they're very religious, and they won't sign you off as having completed the program unless you say the Lord's Prayer or do some other thing. And otherwise, then all the time you spent there, you don't get any credit for in the system.
Right.
And so there are religious people who have no compunction about taking advantage of the proselytizing opportunities.
That's exactly the problem we're having. I've got letters, people writing to the Hickory Humanist Association, saying just that these religious groups that are running these AA meetings, they require you to be preached to, and they require you to be saved before you can pass the program.
Right.
And that's just not right.
Right. And they seem not to mind people faking it in order to get the credit. In other words, they don't care if you come to Jesus while you're holding your nose or if you come to Jesus genuinely and sincerely, just so long as they get you the mouth the words. I mean, that's really how superficial it can become, that they would put you between a rock and a hard place like that. And oftentimes people will do the practical and frankly sensible thing and just play the game, and then go home and deal with it emotionally later. But it's not fair. It's not right. We know that.
It's treating the human as a weakness, the human body as a weakness, and they're not addressing the issue that brought that person there to begin with.
Right. But seldom do we get in life anything like perfection or even the way things ought to be. And so we can say, well, this is how it should be, and we can agree on that. And part of being a humanist is trying to make things the way they should be. However, things often are not the way they should be, and people often do things they shouldn't. And you have to work with that until you can bring about change. And that means you just have to swallow your pride and do what you have to do to get through that system. And then you can tell your story later and you can say, well, now this is what I had to do. And isn't that unfair and so forth. But yeah, we have to live in the world we find ourselves in. And it is a world in which we suffer discrimination, and we want to change that, but it isn't changed yet. And therefore we have to work through it.
Right. Yes. Well, Major Mac, the question he asked a little bit ago, you touched on some of the things that's going to be part of this question. So I apologize for you having to repeat a couple of these things. But I've recently been asked to speak to a secular homeschooling association in the area. And they're actually studying world religions.
Yeah.
And they want to include humanism as one of the world religions. And I'm using quotation marks there. And so they've asked me to come speak. So in doing my research here, I'm going to ask you, if you were in front of homeschooled students, how would you define humanism for them?
Well,
in this context of world religion.
Sure. And humanism can be viewed as either a philosophy or a religion, depending on how you use it in your life. There are those who call themselves religious humanists, and the difference between a religious and a secular humanist is how you spend your weekends. So, the philosophy is the same. So and therefore, if you are covering, religions and ideologies and worldviews and philosophies, which is really what you're doing, well, you got to be in the game. And, like they say about the lottery, you got to be in it to win it. So, you got to be in the game. And that means go ahead and let them treat humanism as a religion, even though if that designation bothers you, because it all hinges on how you define religion anyway. And as John Dewey, the philosopher, noted, there really isn't any such thing as religion anyway, because you can't define that term in a way that includes all the world religions and doesn't include a lot of other stuff that doesn't belong. And you can't narrow it down to something that's easy to label, because then you leave out so many religions. So therefore there are religions, but to say that there's a single thing called religion that includes these things and not others, right, we can't come up with a term like that. It's just a hopeless, quixotic venture. So, therefore, if you can get into the program, just think of it that way. I'm in the program. I get to offer an alternative view. And if the alternative view even is, in effect, none of the above, that's legitimate, because what you're saying to the students is you don't have to choose one of these things. Right. You can opt out of the smorgasbord altogether. You can say, I want none of this stuff. So you can have religions and you can have alternatives to religion, or philosophical views that function in the lives of their adherents very much the way religions do in the lives of their adherents. So what I would do is I would talk about the basic ideas of humanism, and I would talk about how skepticism is an important part of our outlook, that you have to kind of clear away the cobwebs of views that may be widely held but don't seem to be true. You need to be able to question these ideas and then kind of clear the air and then say, all right, so what do I believe and what is the basis for it? So you start from the ground up. The thing that is interesting about humanism is that, unlike all of the other religious worldviews that hang their ideas on a skyhook, there's some ultimate truth up there, and we somehow have to connect with what's up there. Well, we build our philosophy from the ground up. We start first with ourselves and say, how do I know this? We ask others, how do you know what you're claiming? But we start with, how do I know things? The big, 4-cylinder word for that is epistemology. It's the study of how humans know things and how we claim to know things and what the basis of human knowledge is. But it all comes down to what is the basis of understanding how the world works. And it has to do with observation and rational analysis and repeatable experiments and things of that nature. And that's the way we do it. And we build piece by piece from the ground up. We start with what we're able to see, what we're able to test, what we're able to experience. And it isn't easy. It's taken centuries to develop ideas about the nature of the world that are, in fact, true and reliable. And we need to also understand our own psychology and how we fool ourselves sometimes and how we engage in intellectual bias and rationalization and things like that. So we need to challenge that. But little by little, we can look around and say, well, this is the kind of society I want to live in. This is how I want to have a better world. And this is what makes sense. These are the facts I know, and these are the things that I find that most human beings want. So how can we realize those things? And from that, you can develop a human-based ethic. You can develop, art and literature and things that express these ideas. So all of the things commonly associated with religion can be developed from the ground up instead of top down, and is human-focused, human-based, human-derived. And that's really what humanism is that we start from ourselves and work outward. We don't start from some perfect something that we just decide to buy into and then try to extrapolate downward from that, or try to just do a reductionistic thing like everybody else does.
Right. I like that. It's amazing to me how I've considered myself and labeled myself a humanist for a long time. I've created, or founded a humanist group, doing a podcast that I'm still defining that word.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning how to, not so much, I think I understand it, or I understand me. And then I've adopted that label. It's explaining it to other people. When somebody comes up to you and says, well, what exactly is a humanist?
Right.
Okay.
And that's why you have to make a quick assessment of where this person is likely coming from.
Right.
So that you talk their language, because it's so easy to talk past people, especially if we're involved in humanism so much, we start using our own lingo and we're talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And then we use expressions and terms that do not compute with somebody else who hasn't gone our path, and therefore they don't know what we're talking about. So you have to deliver it from where they are. And so you have to try to figure out, where they're coming from. And if you can't figure it out, it's okay to ask before answering the question. You might say, well, what have you heard? Or, because, if they've heard that, we're just out to destroy America and take away their guns, then we can, talk about that. And obviously that's what's on their mind. You want to know what's on their mind. Why are they asking? Now, I have a lapel pin that I wear on my, coat. And it's on my right lapel, by the way, so that when I shake people's hands, their eye goes right to it. That's an old trade show technique. Mm-hmm. All right. And they look at that Happy Humanist logo, with the character with his hands up in the air and saying, wee, and people look at that and say, what's that? Okay. And that starts the conversation. See, then I can talk about the symbol. Then I can talk about, we're a human-based idea. And if I'm not sure if they're going to be hostile or friendly, I might just say, we're an organization that deals with a lot of social issues, and we're concerned about ethics, and we try to use a scientific approach. See, I don't start with, we're a bunch of atheists,
Right.
And besides that, we aren't all, because some like the term agnostic, some like the term agnostic. As I like to say, there are atheists, agnostics, and apatheists. Those who don't believe, don't know, or don't care. Mm-hmm. And so, it's all fine. If you're non-theistic in some manner, shape, or form, that's really a pretty basic thing for humanists, although a lot of humanist ideas can be held by people who believe in some natural God concept. But the humanist organizations don't promote that. Individuals might do that. But
I've definitely found my new opening line for when we do Oktoberfest downtown Hickory. Because that's good. Because it is, you're right. I mean, when people walk up, you don't know exactly where they're coming from.
Right. So what have you heard?
Yeah.
And, and if you have some provocative saying on your booth, then like you can be good without God, which is the tack that the American Humanist Association has taken. Well, then they'll kind of have an idea where you're coming from, that you're the good without God people. Well, then all kind of people will come up, including, well, how do you define good? Okay, well, now you're dealing with a philosophical type. Okay, what's good? Maybe they're already past the without God part, but now they want to know, what do you mean by good?
Yeah.
And we in that slogan only use it generically anyway. We're not making a resounding philosophical statement that there is some philosopher's stone, and if you touch it, you'll know what good is. It's not that esoteric, but it's just a basic idea to get the conversation started. Just to say that we believe in the idea that human beings can be ethical without this philosophical abstraction. And that's what the God idea is when you get right down to it. It's a philosophical abstraction, and we can do without it. And we wonder why people think they can't. I mean, once you've been a humanist as long as I have, you shake your head. You say, well, why do they need that? I mean, we all know what we're doing. If you're a really nasty person and you don't like people of races different from yours, you're going to behave in a certain way, whether you believe in God or not. And if you are a loving, kindly, gentle person, you're going to behave in an entirely different way, whether you believe in God or not. So frankly, it's irrelevant in many ways what philosophical abstraction you happen to hold to. And I'm more interested in the kind of life you lead.
Sorry, I don't know where that's coming from.
Yeah.
I got a question that goes along with this. Many people ascribe to religion because they believe it provides them the answers to the big questions we all like to ask. What's my purpose in life? Or what happens after I die? Does humanism provide the answers to these types of questions?
No, we say they're stupid questions. First of all, what is the purpose of life? Well, there's nothing in the cosmos that's telling you what you should do with your life. There's you who might want to find out what you should do with your life by looking at yourself and trying out various things and so on. But as I mentioned in my talk at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Raleigh the other day, in a talk called The Promise of Humanism, I said, life isn't purpose, life is art, that it's the art of living. It's kind of a dance, the dance of life. It's a way of going through things in a way that's meaningful for you, and it isn't about finding some ultimate meaning. People seem to be looking for authority to tell them how to live their lives when they ask that question, what's the meaning of life? Or they're looking for permission to do what they already want to do. Mm-hmm. And frankly, if what you already want to do is commit genocide, well, we want to discourage that. And I'm afraid you're going to be unfulfilled if that is your driving purpose in life. And it's going to be the job of the rest of us to make sure that you are. So if that's your purpose in life, I'm sorry, you're outvoted. But most people's purpose in life is not going to run them contrary to everybody else. And so therefore, because we are social animals by nature, we do tend in similar tracks because we do share a common humanity. We tend to want many of the same things. And so it isn't that difficult to find common values that we all pursue. I mean, even toddlers know when things are unfair. You don't have to teach the concept of fairness to kids. You might have to get them to narrow it down a little bit and not think that anything they don't want is unfair. But nonetheless, we do have a common humanity, so therefore it isn't that hard to come up with common values. All right, so that deals with the meaning in life. Now, as for life after death, the moment you start thinking about it, if you really think about it, instead of just engaging in wishful thinking, it breaks down right away. It just makes no sense. For example, how is this life a preparation for a life that is so dramatically different? The first question I always ask on that is, well, how old will you be in heaven? And because statistics show that most people want to be at the physical age of their mid to late 20s. That's what they remember as the best years of their lives. They may want to have the brains they have now, or maybe not, but they certainly value, the look and feel and their appearance at that age. I says, okay, so chances are your children are going to want to be the same age when they're in heaven. And chances are your parents wanted to be that age. So everybody's going to be the same age in heaven, grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren. And all of our human relationships are based on these age differences. And you suddenly put everybody in heaven to make them happy. And all of a sudden, that all disappears. In fact, the idea of heaven just robs the logic of everything. What we really want is just more life and more young life and more smart life. And so, for example, if we have our physical powers when we're young and we have lots of money when we're old, okay, we'd like to be able to put those together and have more of that stuff. Because the other thing about life is that life is struggle. We love struggle. We have evolved to survive in really, really hard times when life was nasty, brutish, and short. What kept us going? Right. We must have loved it. Why does a cat play with a mouse? Well, if it's well fed, it plays with a mouse because it loves to hunt and it doesn't get to hunt anymore. So therefore it plays with the mouse as a kind of a luxury thing. Well, we humans do it too. We've made our lives so comfortable that now we can only get our pleasures vicariously by things like plays and movies and video games and things like that. Things that are unreal because we're not struggling for our next meal. And people find all sorts of ways of bringing some kind of meaning and struggle into their lives, like getting into fights with their neighbors and their relatives and things like that. Or you can get yourself a vital, absorbing interest and study something and learn new stuff and write a book and do all of these creative things. That's what gives meaning to life. Not this heaven stuff. This heaven stuff is too perfect. We'd be miserable in heaven. There's just no way that heaven makes sense for happiness. It doesn't make sense for getting along with anyone. It doesn't make sense as a recompense for things that were wrong in this life. Because who's to say, as Bertrand Russell asked, who's to say that heaven doesn't also have its own injustices? You know, there's no proof that heaven is going to set everything right. And why? And what about people who have great lives here? And then they get great lives in heaven. And then other people have miserable lives here and get great lives in heaven. Well, is that fair? Does that really balance the ledger? You know, or do we have to take the people who are happy here and we have to, you know, give them a few lashes there for a while until the ledger is balanced? And what kind of sick, twisted system is that? Right. So therefore, the more you think about it, and I could just go on and talk about the physics of it, the science of it, you know, the way the brain works, everything. And the more you think about it, the less this whole idea makes any sense. It only comes down to two things. One, we know we're going to die because we see other people die. All right. And two, we can't imagine ourselves dead because when you're dead, you don't experience your own death. You don't, you're not conscious. So you're not conscious that you're dead. So we can't picture ourselves dead. So therefore it's hard for us to think that we will ever be dead.
That's true.
And that's the dilemma. So we know we die and yet we can't feel ourselves dying because even when we dream, we're thinking of ourselves and as existing.
Right.
And so, and we don't, as humanists, believe that when you die, you go into a void. We believe that when you die, that's it. You don't experience your own death.
Right.
Death is a non-event in the life of the one who dies.
Right. Well, that was going to be my last question, but my iPad got hacked and it says, what's your position on feminism?
Well, humanists are feminists, and that's the simple fact. And there are some people who try to dodge this question because they associate the word feminism with some kind of ideas that they don't like that seem a little too radical or whatever. But, I mean, if you just get to the basic idea, do you want your daughters, for example, do you want them to be able to get equal pay for equal work? Well, if your answer to that is yes, well, you're a feminist, whether you like the word or not, or whether you like what this or that feminist may have said at this or that time in the past. It's the basic idea of human rights. And it says they apply to women also. And that gets us right into the same thing with Black Lives Matter. So many people try to dodge that and say, well, I think all lives matter. Well, yes, all lives. Therefore, Black Lives Matter, because hello, you've been forgetting them and in fact been doing a lot of things that you shouldn't be doing. And that's why we have to bring it to your attention. Right. And feminism is the same idea. It's that women's lives matter. And that's because everyone's lives matter, but saying everyone's lives matter doesn't seem to be doing the trick, now does it? No. And so therefore we have to fix it. And how do you fix it? You focus on the problem and you say, here's the problem and here's what we have to do to fix it. And then you go fix it. And that does not mean that you are giving special privileges to the group that you're trying to, well, redress the imbalance. I mean, you know, isn't that the whole idea of a sense of justice, is that you want to redress imbalances. Now we can't fix what was done wrong in the past. We can't undo the evils of the past, but we can learn from them and move beyond. And we need to be willing to do so. And that means you have to teach tolerance and acceptance in the public schools. You have to have programs that do that. you can legislate morality only up to a point, and after that, then you have to actually teach it in the public schools. And I'm afraid here in the South, there isn't this strong a commitment to teaching tolerance of races and ethnicities, and to try to get past these old ideas. And it's a problem. But I think you're here and you can work for that. And you can say, well, look, this is where the action is, right here in North Carolina. This is where the action is. And therefore,
especially lately.
Yeah, exactly. And so therefore, you're in a great place to have a heck of a lot of fun. You can have buckets of fun being a humanist and in the South, because this is your vital absorbing interest. This is the thing that makes life matter, is that you have dragons to slay.
Yeah. Well, I've often said that, people have asked me all the time on the liberal side and on the conservative side, why do you stay here? Why don't you just move somewhere that people think like you do? Because they don't need me there.
Right.
They need me here.
And they don't want him there.
Right.
Right. Well, I mean, you take Gandhi, who, he got an education at Oxford. He could have just stayed in England.
Right.
But no, he first went to South Africa and stirred up trouble there, and then he went to India and stirred up trouble there. Because
everybody heard that. Fred Edwards compared me to Gandhi. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody hear this? Everybody heard that?
No, everybody gets to be their own Gandhi. Find your inner Gandhi.
Yeah, they were both bald.
Neither one of us had hair. Yes. I was born and raised here, so I've got that. I've got that level of commitment to my community and my state. But it does get frustrating sometimes trying to be that voice. But luckily I've got a group of people around me that help me and keep me going.
Well, good. Because if I come here with my Southern California accent and that's got a little bit of Kansas in it, and if I come here and I try to talk to South or North Carolinians, I'm a carpetbagger, right?
Right.
But you're not.
Right.
You live here. You talk the talk, and they know, they can tell, and therefore, you're folks, and that's the way you got to do it, and that's what the humanist Edward O. Wilson, the scientist, does. He was raised in a fundamentalist household, and he went to church every Sunday, and he knows how to talk the talk, and he can talk to fundamentalist ministers and get them on board with recognizing the reality of climate change and doing something to save the planet. Now, if that means he has to say the words, well, we're going to save the creation, all right, fine, whatever you got to say, because there are millions and millions of these evangelicals, and if you can get them on board with environmentalism, man, that's a powerful force. And you're not going to change all their ideas. And then after we save the planet with their help, then they're going to say, see, it was Christianity that saved the planet because we were all Christians. The same thing they did with slavery when it was, the anti-slavery effort was led largely by free thinkers and atheists and people like that. And in fact, people who advocated abolition of slavery were called atheists even when they weren't. But everybody forgets that. Right. Because in order to ultimately win a political battle like that, you have to bring the majority on board. And once the majority come on board, then that mainstreams the whole thing, and then they take credit for it. And therefore, you can't forget history.
That's my dad's whole philosophy on religion and why religion is actually good. He doesn't really believe, I would call him more agnostic. Yeah. He just doesn't really think about it. But he believes that religion was good because it made people believe that they had an obligation. Mm-hmm. And my argument from a humanist standpoint is, look, we've got that within us anyway. We've got the abilities to be good.
Yeah.
So that was really probably the only thing that me and him disagree about in the whole thing. But yeah, it goes right along with that.
Somebody has to think outside the box first. And that tends to be us. And then we raise the issue and raise the consciousness. Right. And then things start to change, and then other people get on board. And you still have to have those people who are always thinking outside the box. So we will, in that sense, always be in the minority. But what a great place that is to be, because we're always at the vanguard. We're always at the point of change. We're always there pushing the envelope to the next great understanding.
Always stirring up shit.
Right.
Well, not just to be stirring it up. Right. Unfortunately, there's a lot out there to stir up, but it isn't to stir it up for the sake of it.
Right.
But it is rewarding emotionally to be part of a great struggle, and it does give life meaning. And so if you're socially movement inclined, well, then that's humanism is where you need to be.
And there's times where you have to compromise and you have to choose your battles.
Oh, everybody has to compromise. I mean, for example, when they were trying to end slavery, they didn't say end slavery gradually. They said end slavery now.
Right.
But it's never now. Right. It is gradually, but you don't get it gradually unless you demand it now. Mm-hmm. And so that's the whole point, is that, yeah, it always requires compromise. It always requires slowness and change, and the wheels of justice move very slowly, and everything takes time, and always more time than we want it to or think it should. And that's just the way of things. And we need to be honest and realistic with ourselves, with a little touch of cynicism, to just recognize that this is how the world works, damn it. And we just need to do our best with what we've been given.
Right. Okay. Well, do you have any other questions?
That's all I have.
We could literally sit here and talk with you for hours, and I wish we could. And
I had to streamline my questions. So.
Yeah. But we do have dinner to go to here in a little bit.
Yes,
so
we do.
We're looking forward to that. Just wanted to thank you again for what you do. And do you want to talk about, I know right now, the thing that's most prevalent on your plate is the humanist. I don't have it in front of me. The charitable.
Yeah. The Humanist Foundation. Is that what you mean?
I think so. Yeah.
Let me.
Yeah, the Humanist Foundation.
Yeah. Here's the yes. Let me talk about that, because this is really important. How is it, people ask, that bad ideas prosper so well? And the answer usually eventually comes to, well, they got lots of money. Well, where do they get that money from? Like as though somehow irrational ideas attract money. It's not true. Okay? Money is attracted to those who go out and raise it. All right? And every movement to be successful is going to need money.
Sure.
Now, one of the ways that these movements are successful is they get money, like from rich people, and they give lots of money. And so many of these organizations that do both good and do mischief in the world are bankrolled by wealthy donors. Okay. So no one should ever feel ashamed asking for money for a good cause, that people shouldn't give till it hurts. They should give till it feels good. And so there's nothing wrong with asking for money. Now, in my case, I don't ask people for a check because I deal in wills and bequests. The Humanist Foundation is all about people leaving money in their will. Now, that's money you're never going to spend, right? I mean, now, if you could spend your last nickel with your last breath, well, you might, but timing it that perfectly is very difficult. And most people actually were social animals by nature, so most people aren't that selfish anyway. So they're going to leave stuff. Right. For their relatives. They're going to support their genes, as you might say. But what about your memes, your values? What are you doing to help your values that you've worked so hard for through your humanist activism, to carry those on to future generations? And since it's money you're not going to spend anyway, all you have to do is promise it to, make 10% to the American Humanist Association or its Humanist Foundation, and that money will be invested. And it will earn interest, and the interest will support the national organization year after year. It becomes a gift that keeps on giving. It doesn't cost you anything. You will never miss it, but you have to make a will. You have to have an estate plan. And so many people don't. They say, well, I'll do that when I retire. And I have to remind folks, you're never too young to die. So therefore, wake up. It could be tomorrow, but you can make these plans, and so many universities and science programs and religions and charitable projects are funded by wills and bequests, that this is an endowment fund is the thing that carries so many of these projects forward. And it's so easy for everyone to do, and it's so cost free. And because people say, well, I don't have much money. Okay, fine. Put a percentage in your will, 10%. So if you die with $100, okay, we get 10, right?
Right.
But that's okay. $10 is something. But if you die a millionaire, well, guess what? It makes a big difference. And yet your relatives, your loved ones, they're going to be able to spend the 90% that you have remaining for them just as fast as they can spend the 100%. They're not going to miss that 10%, but we're going to be able to do great things with it.
Right.
Eat into the future for as long as we're around.
I like that. Well, that sounds like important work. And, so I wish you luck with that.
Oh, then no luck.
I know.
It's all skill. It's all just talking about it and reminding people of the facts.
I can tell you're good at it too. Absolutely. Well, you've convinced me. I'll write my will tomorrow.
All right. You do that.
Maybe tonight. I better not take any chances.
No, don't put it off.
So, well, we want to thank Fred Edwards for traveling from the nation's capital to come visit with us down here in North Carolina, especially during this time where we seem to be really struggling morally in the state. But thanks for coming by.
It was my pleasure.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank you.
it very much.
Thank you very much.
And so we'll, I guess we'll sign off for today, and we'll hit you guys next time.
Let's go eat.
This Atheist Avengers, and we're out.